So you'll have a column for output, a column for all of the important relevant costs, a column for your variable costs, fixed costs, total costs, your average costs, and then your marginal cost. That should be everything you need. You may want to add in a column related to demand, but honestly, you could do that so that it will help you if you want to make graphs in Excel. I would recommend doing that. But a few of the questions that hopefully I can address here that other students had, or maybe they didn't understand what my answer was, but that's basically what the setup is the most difficult part of this is setting up the table. Once you set up the table, it should be similar to what you did in the homework. And then hopefully from the second unit or the third unit, you can remember, okay, marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That's our profit maximizing. We can compare the price based on the demand curve that I've given you at each location to the actual average total cost that's in my file. And then I can see if they're making money or not. So that's basically what the process is for this. The tricky part is knowing what goes where. So first things first is you're going to be open 6 days per week. So if you want to do this as a weekly calculation, so again, everyone's answers could be different. So if you want to make the analysis daily, it's going to have different numbers scaled to one way. If you want to do this weekly, it's going to be scaled to a different way. If it's monthly, it's going to be scaled a different way.
I was just gonna do it by month, because you see here the legal fees, the insurance, and the accounting fees. That's every month, and splitting those in quarters would just be a headache.
Right. So it depends on what you want to do. Monthly is probably the easiest because it's easier to scale up from days and weeks versus scaling down from months backwards, especially if you're paying like rent is per month and your loan is going to be per month. So it's probably easiest to do it per month. But if you wanted to do it by week, that's okay as well. You just got to make sure that you're changing it in the scale. The ultimate answer should be similar if you were to scale up to a year or something like that. But so your analysis shouldn't be any different based on the length of time. It'll just have different numbers, and that's okay as long as you're doing it properly. So if you're going to be doing monthly, they're open 6 days per week, just scaled up to 4 weeks. So that would be 24 days that they would be open. And if it's per week, then multiply it times 4. We don't have to split hairs and be like, oh, well, it's 4.5 to be 31 days or something like that. So you were given $200,000 for a business loan. You shouldn't have to use all of that. You can if you want to, but I don't see a situation where you would. You also have a choice between using the $25,000 of your own money to make it less money that you borrow, or you could just ignore that money altogether and just exclusively borrow money.
I was just going to sink my own cash into it at the start, because the less you have to borrow is the less you have to pay in the long run.
Exactly. So, so that is up to you and up to the individual. You do have to use the loan because I'm pretty sure you don't have enough money off the 25,000 to be able to purchase the one-time equipment.
Yeah, I did like a rough guesstimate, and it was somewhere like 50,000-60,000 you needed just to get this thing started.
Yeah, so you'll have to borrow some amount of money. So if you borrowed the whole thing, this is how much your payment would be. You're not going to, I don't think. So what I would recommend, so if you were to say you're going to borrow 50,000, so you borrow 50,000, then to calculate your monthly payment, you would multiply 50,000 times 0.12. This is your interest rate of 12%. And then 3 is the number of years that you're borrowing it for. So if you were to borrow $50,000, it should be 1/4 of whatever that is, which is about $1,800 a month, maybe. So 50,000 about 18,000. Whoops. That's how much you pay in interest. So 68,000 divided by 36. So about 1888 a month. That's how much your loan would be every month. So that would be your fixed cost. One of them. Your rent's always going to be a fixed cost too. And so are these legal fees, insurance, accounting, that's all a fixed cost.
So the business loan, whatever you decide, if it's 50, 60, 70, or 80,000, it's every time fixed cost, right?
Yeah, so you're just going to basically calculate the monthly cost, and then that's going to be a fixed cost that you're having to pay every month to offset whatever your startup costs are. One thing that's important to remember that a few students were making the mistake of, if you're using the loan to cover those startup costs, such as the oven, the mixers, the shelving, the refrigerators, and all that in the construction, that's part of the business loan. So you don't need to count it twice. So a mistake that some people would say is they would put the construction cost in to their production function. But if your loan is covering that and you're paying the loan back over time, the loan is what's covering the construction cost. So you don't need to include them both. So some people were overstating significantly what their actual costs were, because they're like, well, I have 50,000 that I'm borrowing, but I also have 50,000 of startup costs. So I really have $100,000 I have to pay back. But the reality is you only have the 50. So that's one thing to take in consideration. So a lot of these costs here, the cost will vary based on the location, because some places have 3 mixers, some have 2, most have 1. Some have 2 ovens, some have 1, some have 2 refrigerators, some have 1. So that'll vary based on the location, which will affect how much you borrow at each location. Again, and you're treating these all as separate analyses. So you're not trying to open all 4 at once. You're basically treating them as separate scenarios, where I could open at location 1, this is what I would do. If I open at location 2, this is what I would do. If I open at 3, this is what I would do. So your loan amount might be different. Your payments might be different, because you might have different amounts of capital that you're putting in those locations.
So I can decide location 1, I can take 50,000. Location 2, I can take 80,000. So that's
exactly
possible. Okay.
That's
okay.
Yes.
Question: Is the employee salary, is that a fixed cost? Is that a variable cost?
It's a variable cost based on how many workers you hire.
Okay.
So it should be consistent, but technically it's a variable cost, because if you decide, oh, I can't afford to operate, then you wouldn't hire anybody.
And the raw materials, is that a fixed cost or a variable cost?
That's a variable cost, because it's dependent upon how many units you produce. So if you produce nothing, your raw materials is 0. If you produce nothing, your employees, you don't hire anybody, so it's 0. So those are
Okay.
variable costs dependent upon how many units you make.
And despite, okay, yeah, okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah, so if you make like 200 units, this would be $300 a day. And then, so bakery ovens. Oh, another thing, the mixers. So I didn't mean to confuse you. I just wanted it to be realistic that, oh, you could use the mixer more than once in a day based on the amount of time it would take. And so this is really 120 units per day per mixer, not 60. So a lot of people are like, well, why would I buy a second fridge if I can only make 120 units because I have 2 mixers? And it's no, you can make double that, 240. So
I also noticed that the mixer was kind of the hard cap on any location. If I can only get 1 mixer in a location, then I can only produce 120 units regardless of whatever else I do.
Yep. Well, that was kind of another point in the process is it was to show you, okay, well, some locations probably aren't going to be ideal if you can't you can only make 120 units. So like you might have to spend more money to be able to make the business profitable because you need that space. It also helps show you that and workers are not the only bottleneck on production, spaces too.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe I was a little too like draconian with the caps on some of these locations, but it was to help demonstrate
Yeah.
that consequence.
So far, I kind of favor the fourth place you can rent because you can get 3 mixers in there, which gives you a lot more options.
It gives you more options, but you also have to take into consideration, is the demand going to be there still?
Yeah.
If it is, then great. If it's not, maybe not. So
Also, question.
Mhm.
I think like with area 4, it says you can charge, say, you can sell 300 at 0.75, but if you can only say produce 280, am I still selling those at 7.5 or am I selling it under that?
You're selling it over that actually. So there's a little formula here in part 4. So if you
Yeah.
sold, let's say 280, you would take the difference here between 280 and 150, which would be 130 over 150,
So it would
and
actually
then
increase the
multiply that
price?
times the $1.50, and then subtract that from 9, and it'll give you the price. So it'll be like 775 or something like that.
So the fact that I'm producing under that would actually increase the price?
It'll increase the price because you'll have fewer customers
Okay.
that you have to serve.
Now, can we go over that equation too, just to make sure we do that right?
Yeah, so for this example down here, let's say demand is $6, or demand at $6 is 300, and at $5 it's 400, and you make 360, then you would just take the difference between the two prices, which is $1, and then take the ratio there. So it's 100 is between them. So the denominator is 100. The difference between where you're actually producing and that is 360 minus 300, which is 60. So you do 60 divided by 100, which is 0.6 times $1. So that means you take 60 cents off of the higher price. So 60 cents off of 6 is 540. So you're not going to sell at 5, you're going to sell at 540.
Okay.
Because it's a linear demand curve, you can do that.
Yeah. Because that's something I think we're pretty much going to have to do on every one of them because we're never going to meet the exact number, I don't think.
I don't think so either, but I mean, I think what you could do, presumably, is you could just use the lower price and see if you're profitable at that price. And then if it's like really close, then you can do the analysis with the more granular price.
Okay.
So like if you're making like 10 grand or like 3 grand a month at the lower price, you'll make profits even more. Presumably you'd make even more revenue at the higher price, and you'd still have the same quantity demanded because it's your cap. So you could do back of the envelope rough estimates with the existing demand curve if you want to. But if it's tight where like, okay, your price is like $4, but your marginal cost is like, or your average total cost is like $3.95, then you might be more concerned with doing that analysis. So I would go through it quickly and then go back and do that at the end.
Okay. And Andrew wanted to go through the first location.
Yeah, so if you were to create a production function for the first location, if you added up all of these costs, so again, you don't have to hire 5 employees, just to be clear. It just means that you couldn't hire more than 5 employees. Does that make sense? And chances are you wouldn't want to hire 5 employees or more than 5 employees because your marginal product of labor is small based on this. So like employee 4 makes 60, employee 5 makes 50, employee 6 makes 40, et cetera, et cetera. So if you got to like employee 9, they wouldn't contribute anything but cost and give you no output.
So there's like only one mixer. So we know that one mixer can only produce 120 units. So I probably don't need more than 3. No, 3.
2.
Probably just
yeah.
the 2.
Yeah, just the 2.
Yep.
Because
So
the first 2 can
Mhm.
produce 150, which is
Mhm.
another question I had. Like, am I in? Like, if I was interviewing these first 3 employees, I would drop the first one and hire the second, third one. Can I do that?
That's what I thought too.
So basically you're assuming that their skill sets are the same. And the reason why the second worker is more efficient is because they can delegate tasks and specialize instead of having to do everything by themselves.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
That's the reason why. Is the reason why employee 1 is only making 50 units is basically you could call them A, B, or C or whatever. Like employee 1 is assuming that whether they're A, B, or C, they're by themselves, and their productivity is going to be negatively impacted by the fact that they can't delegate tasks. Think about comparative advantage, where, okay, I can do all of this, or if I tried to split myself between 2 things, I can only do so much. Versus if we have 2 people specialize, and then you end up at that point that's more productive than by yourself. So that's kind of what that's implying.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's not to say that employee is bad or worse or better. It's just that if you have 2 workers together, then they can produce more.
Yep.
But it's a good question because without that context, it can kind of be like, well, why would I hire this crappy guy when I could hire? Anyways, so if you go into this, employees are going to be part of the variable costs, fixed, 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 and fixed. So if you buy all that, you would be paying, let's see, 10,000 plus 1,500 plus 2,000. So you're at 13,500, 15,000, and 17,000. Plus the construction cost is 47,000. Plus this is 1,000. So that's about $48,000.
What's the incorporation fee? Like
basically registering the corporate company with the state.
I was going to say it's
making it a
probably
real
some kind of
business.
license.
Yeah, licensing. Can't avoid that.
Yeah, you can't legally sell a hot dog on a street corner without some kind of permit.
Okay.
So that's about 48 grand in your fixed costs. So your choice is that you can put this 25 grand towards that, and then you have 23,000 that you have to borrow, or you can borrow all 48,000 from the loan. And so at that point, your answers will be different based on what you choose to do, but you now know the process and to calculate the loan payment that you're gonna roll that into. Whether it's the 48,000 and you put 48,000 here, that'll calculate your interest, add that, and then divide that by 36. That's your payment per month, every month, whether you make anything or not. If it's the 23,000, then you would do the same formula with 23,000. Your payment is probably going to be lower. Well, it will be lower, be substantially lower, probably half as much, about 900 something a month. So once you do that, then all of these costs, you don't have to worry about anymore.
And
so
not,
you have to worry about the productivity that is associated with them, but you don't have to worry about building them into your production function anymore in terms of adding them in because they're part of the loan.
Okay. And not to add more work on, but you notice that the storage doesn't have a number of how much you can hold. I was wondering if there was a number, or if that doesn't matter.
I think every location just says one storage. So I think it was just for like dry ingredients and stuff. So there is no cap because all locations have the same storage constraint, but there is no constraint on it. Really, the constraint is how quickly you can bake the stuff, how quickly you can make the dough, and how much space you have to store stuff. Now, the assumption is that someone asked this question, assume that everything you make gets sold that day, or just assume it's sold that day and that you don't have any inventory that's left over, or just assume that if you didn't sell it, that it just is spoiled. Because someone was asking, oh, well, what if we like on our off day produced like 120 units or something like that, and then we added another 120, and then one day out of the week we get double the output. But
surplus doesn't really work in a bakery. That's how you get
Yeah.
the day old bread, and that's not really all that good.
No, that's why it's really cheap too. But yeah, so the assumption is that you wouldn't have any excess inventory. The storage is just for your dry like flour and yeast and all that stuff, and then the fridge is for cold stuff and all that stuff. So yeah, so
But
these
then
are critical.
Yeah, so
Go
then the
ahead.
fixed cost of location one would be like the legal fees, insurance, accounting fees, and then like the loan you need to pay.
And your rent.
Oh yeah, forgot the rent, sorry.
So those are your fixed costs, yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
Where do
then I
we
made
And then your
already a
variable
big
costs will be
mistake
the
then.
raw materials, employees.
Yeah,
Then,
then I already
okay.
made there a big mistake.
Where do we put the construction and the refrigerator, and what is that if that's not a fixed cost?
It's part of the loan.
Okay, it's part of the loan, so we don't actually have to add it in at all.
No.
Oh, you already paid
What
it
you
with
have
your
to
loan.
you have to identify how much of your private money is being used for it. So that way you're justifying why the loan is the amount it is. But yeah, because you'd be adding it in twice. The loan is there so you don't have to pay for it up front because you don't have the money to pay for it all up front. So you could choose to put it all on the loan and then pay it back over time and save that 25K for when your business inevitably fails, if it ever does, or put it in crypto or something, whatever you want to put it in, stocks, GameStop, whatever, or just have it as an emergency fund for your actual life and not the business. Or you can spend it. It's really up to you. I put the $200,000 number there just as if people wanted to be weird and just be like, okay, well, I'm just going to take it all out. And then just whatever residual I have, I just apply that to my monthly costs. You could, but it makes it messy and complicated. And also it wouldn't be very smart because why would you take 12% interest on something that you can presumably pay for or money you don't need that you're starting the business to make that money, so you don't need to borrow it. So you should only really borrow what you need to cover the fixed costs.
Okay.
Okay.
See, that was part of what was tripping me up. I was going, do I count the construction in the mixer and the ovens as a fixed cost? It's not a variable cost. It can't be, or is it a total cost?
Yeah, it's a fixed cost, but because you're borrowing the money, you're basically rolling all that into the loan. So then it's a much quicker, simpler thing on your budget line.
Okay, so really the only thing I calculate for the fixed cost is the loan and the rent.
And the legal insurance accounting
yes.
stuff.
Okay.
which is 1,000 a month. I made it round. If you just add them all together, it's 1,000 a month.
That makes sense now.
So then once you do all that, then you can hopefully, if you put that all in Excel, what I would recommend is make each row like workers, just an added worker, just like we did with the regular in-class problem. Eventually you're going to get to a cap, especially if you have that one mixer. You're after the second employee there, your output is going to be stuck at 120 or whatever, which basically makes your marginal cost infinity. So one thing I recommended to students if they were trying to make the graph in Excel is to just like nominally just say, okay, worker 3 makes 2 units and worker 4 makes 1 unit. So it's like 122 and 123. So that way you're not dividing by 0. So you get an actual number for marginal cost. You know that that number is going to be astronomical. But so that way, let me share the whiteboard real quick. So now that you know this, you're probably going to have 0 if you have no workers, 50, then 120 is the total output because you're capped by the mixer. Even though you could make 150 with that worker, you can't because of your capital constraints. And then it would just be 120, 120, 120. So this is output. This is the workers. So you have no workers, 1 worker, 2 workers, 3 workers, 4 workers. And so like they all cost 400. So worker cost is 0, 400, 800, 1,200, 1,600. Your raw materials aren't changing. So here you're at 0. This is what's 50 times what? 75. This is 330. And then it's 330 all the way up because you're not producing anything extra. And then you have your legal costs. So that's all 1,000. And then you have your loan, which is going to vary based on what you do. So you have your loan. So this will be some number that'll be the same all the way through. And then you have your rent, which is what, 1,700? Is that how much it is for the first location?
1,700.
So this is basically what your production function should look like. And then you would, from this, calculate your total cost, average variable, average fixed, marginal. Now, what'll happen is because this is the change in quantity is the denominator of marginal cost. So marginal cost is this. This is 0. So for here, it's 50, 70, 0, and 0. So what's going to end up happening is if you try to calculate this in Excel, it's going to give you an error because you're taking the change in labor, which is 400, dividing it by 0. So it's infinity. So what I recommend, so that way, if you're trying to create a graph in Excel, so it gives you a real number, what you can do is just, these numbers aren't going to matter for your actual analysis. So it's okay to fudge them just a smidge like this. Just make this one like 122 and make this one 123. And then your marginal cost here is going to be like 200. And here it's going to be like 400. So your graph is going to look like this. Instead of it just kind of looking like this. And then it's like, I don't know what to do here. So you can do that because it's going to give you the same, your marginal, your optimal is going to be there. So all this stuff is inconsequential anyways. So you have to, so if you want to do that so you get clean graphs, if you're using Excel for that, I'm perfectly okay with that. So hopefully that gives you some insight as to what you're doing in terms of setting things up. Once you get there, then you'll have all your average costs and your marginal costs. And then to make them in Excel, if you're using Excel, you don't have to. Let me share the screen again. Whiteboard. you would take, let's just say that you've calculated, let's just say you calculated total cost and total variable cost and total fixed cost or something. Say this is total cost. What you would do to calculate average total cost, you would take this column and then make this the y coordinate, and then take this and make this the x coordinate. And then for average fixed cost, or excuse me, average variable cost, you would take this column as the y, this will still be the x. If you do to average fixed cost, this will be the y, and this will still be the x. Then for marginal cost, the thing that's different is you have to take the differences between them to get your numerator and denominator. So it's going to be the difference between these rows as your y, and the difference between these rows. Actually, no, that's not true. This is still going to be your x, but marginal cost is going to be your y, but the way you calculate is by taking the difference between these and dividing them. So to calculate your average total cost, you have to divide this by this to get an answer. And then to plot it, you take the ATC column, make that your y, take the ABC column, make that your y, take the AFC column, make that your y. And then this will be the X column for all of them. Same with marginal cost. So you still have to either manually or through algebra, through Excel, calculate ATC, ABC, and AFC from their respective columns. And then to plot it on a graph, you would make this the Y and make this the X using the charts function with like line graphs. But you could do it by hand. That's fine with me too. If you've calculated all this by hand or with Excel, you don't know how to make the graphs, you can just draw them. That's fine. And you don't even need them. Technically, you don't have to have graphs. It's just that if you don't do something right, it helps me identify where you made your mistakes. That way I can give you partial credit, most credit. This is not an all or nothing type analysis. I expect people to get different answers. And I also expect people to make some mistakes. But hopefully most of the mistakes that you were running into initially, you know kind of why they might have been mistakes or what you were doing wrong. And then when it comes to determining profitability, again, you're just comparing price to average total cost at your profit max, AKA, so with the first location or any location where you're capped at 120, that's probably going to be your profit maximizing level of output. If you are able to produce a lot more, it's possible that your profit maximizing level of output may be less than the most you can make. So take that in consideration for each location. So hopefully that gives you enough setup to feel like you can do it now if you're kind of running into problems.